We do have the guidelines open for public comment until July 20th, which I'll get into in a little bit. And wanted to walk through a little bit of the content and then leave plenty of time for you all to ask questions. So during the webinar, feel free to type in questions in the chat as I'm sort of going through the presentation. And then afterwards, we'll make sure that there's some time to respond to those questions. We can also unmute folks towards the end if you would prefer to say out loud that you're also interested in providing a comment. So let's then get started. So we're going to start today by providing just a little introduction to the Strategic Growth Council for anyone who may not be aware of our organization and what we do. Give a little bit of background on the technical assistance guidelines, the process we went through, and the timeline we have moving forward. And then we'll go through the content and then open it up for any questions or comments as well. So the Strategic Growth Council was created in 2008, and our council is made up of 6 state agency secretaries, the director of the Office of Planning and Research, and 3 public members. And our goal is really to be, helping to the state to coordinate and work collaboratively with public agencies, communities, and stakeholders to achieve sustainability, equity, economic prosperity, and quality of life for all Californians. As I mentioned, these are our council members here. And so our council is sort of the leadership of the Strategic Growth Council. We also have a number of grant programs and technical assistance activities as well. So if you are not familiar with our work, please check out our website and learn more about us or reach out. Just to give a little bit of background on our team, the Community Assistance for Climate Equity team. This team was really created when Senator Leva's Senate Bill 1072 was passed in 2018, which charges the Strategic Growth Council with creating these technical assistance guidelines and also with creating a regional climate collaboratives program, which we won't be talking about on this webinar, but is another effort that we're hoping to get underway as soon as that program is funded. So our team really focuses on providing technical assistance and capacity building to under-resourced communities across the state. And so underneath this umbrella of our team, we have both our technical assistance program and then the regional climate collaboratives program. Our technical assistance program has been around since 2016, and we support a number of different activities to help support low-income and disadvantaged communities in applying for California Climate Investments programs, which is all of the programs that are funded through California's Cap and Trade program. So we provide direct assistance, which in some cases is application assistance or implementation assistance. We also provide capacity building services and are working on ways to integrate California Climate Investments programs on the ground. So I actually already spoke a little bit about 1072, but this is the legislation that calls for SGC to create these guidelines that are really designed to be a best practice and a resource that state agencies can refer to when creating technical assistance programs. And so it's not necessarily a document that's focused on how to actually implement and do TA, but more how to help agencies better understand how to design technical assistance programs. So the process that we went through in order to create these guidelines includes, we have 13 agencies that were a part of our work group, and we had 21 members that were involved in providing a lot of insight and feedback into the document itself, particularly from folks who have experience doing technical assistance work within their agencies. We also did a listening tour at the beginning of this year. Our team connected with a number of different organizations across the state to learn more about how we can support climate and equity goals around the state, to better understand barriers and assets and communities, and how we can really be as supportive as possible. We didn't just focus on the technical assistance guidelines in these conversations. We were also thinking about our own technical assistance and capacity building work. But those conversations certainly did really impact the content that we included in the TA guidelines. The timeline that we have moving forward is we have our webinar happening today. We then have the public comment period will be ending in a couple of weeks here, July 20th. And then we also have the TA guidelines. We are hoping to have them finalized and posted on our website by August 14th and to present them to our council at our August council meeting. Another important thing to note is that we are planning to update the document frequently, at least every 2 years, to make sure that it remains a living document and continues to be useful. So now I'll dive a little bit into the content of the TA guidelines. This is actually the definition that we've used for technical assistance in the guidelines, which is the process of providing targeted support to an agency, organization, or community with a development need or resource gap. TA may be delivered in many different ways, such as one-on-one consultation, small group facilitation, technical resources and analysis, or through a web-based clearinghouse. And it's one of the most effective methods for building the capacity of an organization. The contents of this document include sort of core principles of technical assistance, which I'll talk about a little bit in a moment. We also have a section around getting started and sort of how you can really design and think about how to really respond to community needs through your technical assistance work. We have a section as well on sort of the nuts and bolts of contracting and helping state agencies better understand the procurement practices that are available to them. We also touch on project management, evaluation, communication, and we have a number of appendices. The most robust one is the Tribal Technical Assistance Guidance, which actually isn't included as a part of this draft because it's currently under review with the Governor's Tribal Advisor's Office. However, we will be releasing that for public comment soon in July, and that will be open for tribal public comment. And we'll also be accepting comments from organizations that work very closely with tribes. We also have a number of case studies that we'll be including in the final document, but that are not part of this current draft, as well as a number of different resources that we can point folks to that we may not have been able to cover in the scope of these guidelines, as well as a glossary and acronyms. So just to walk through the 7 sort of core principles of technical assistance that we felt within our work group were really the foundation of supporting applicants and communities more broadly in technical assistance and capacity building work. The first is a real focus on social equity, recognizing that this is not just about providing the same level of services to all communities across the state, but really thinking about how we can provide extra support to communities that need it most, particularly disadvantaged and low-income communities and communities that have suffered from historical barriers that have made it difficult for them to be able to compete, to receive funding from the state, or to do potentially whatever the activities are that that the TA will be helping them to do. So One thing that I should mention too is that much of the TA guidelines are focused on technical assistance for grant applications, but we also want to make sure that it is relevant for supporting policy and implementation of a number of different kinds of activities on the local level. The next is capacity building. We want to recognize that, technical assistance shouldn't just be about, helping communities with a specific technical piece of what they need to do, but helping them to build longer term understanding of how to do a lot of the things that are needed in order to put together competitive applications. And then also bringing in partners, helping to support communities' sort of longer term efforts in a more holistic way. The third is trust. This is something that we felt was really important to, through technical assistance, be able to build trust with communities on the local level. In many cases, many communities have had their trust worn down over a number of different challenges that they have faced and have not felt that the state has necessarily supported them. And so we really want to make sure that this is an opportunity to build trust with communities on the local level. Community engagement is something that is really central to this work and that is highlighted at a number of different places throughout the document. We really want to encourage the work that's being done through technical assistance to be community engaged and community driven when possible. Cultural awareness is another really important element of doing good technical assistance and being cognizant of the communities that you're working with and making sure that the services that you're providing are appropriate to their needs and to their cultural heritage. Adaptability was another really important piece. A lot of times when we're working with communities that are juggling a lot of different issues, things come up. And so it's really important to be sure to be adaptable and responsive and to recognize that, the plan that you may have had in the very beginning of the technical assistance may not actually end up panning out, and it may be important to check back and see where there are opportunities to course correct and improve. And then the last one is mutual learning. And so this is a really important point that comes up a lot, particularly with grant applications. We don't just want to be helping communities to apply for funding, but also to be learning from communities about how we can improve our programs, what particular barriers there may be for folks to be applying to our programs, and if there are ways for us to potentially change the guidelines or be able to find ways to actually alleviate some of those barriers. And then this mutual learning piece also includes some peer-to-peer learning, really thinking about where there are opportunities for TA recipients to engage with one another and to be able to learn from each other's successes and challenges. So the next section focuses on getting started and sort of how to design a program from the beginning. We have 3 separate steps that we've set out here: analyzing needs and gaps, set goals and intended outcomes, and determine the program structure. Step 1 goes through a list, almost like a checklist of different things to be thinking about when analyzing what needs exist and what gaps the technical assistance can be filling. So really thinking about what existing information you have within your agency around, the first point, is on potential funding sources. So starting off with figuring out what you have available to you in order to actually fund the technical assistance. We did make a point that for California climate investments programs, CARB's funding guidelines actually include you know, an allowance for you to be able to use your program funds to be doing technical assistance work. But that may not be the case for all programs. So it's really important, first off, to understand what your funding resources are that are available. And next, then we have starting to evaluate barriers and assets across communities, better understanding the information that you may have internally around some of those barriers and assets, both evaluating past performance as well, looking at your state, so looking at the California state goals as well as your agency and your program goals, and thinking about how you can help to meet those through technical assistance. Doing a technical analysis, which is really looking at the data that you have currently available to you. This may be sort of geospatial data, looking at where you have gaps in where you've received applications, or where you may have some gaps in folks putting in successful applications in the context of a grant program. And then the last piece is public engagement, which again is really core to this work. And we have sort of a longer section around some best practices for public engagement, including a little call out box that provides some best practices around that. Next, step 2 is setting goals and intended outcomes. There is just one section in here, and so I just included some information about sort of the meat of this section, which is really pushing agencies to think about setting goals really early on in the process. And it may be that sometimes some of these goals change and shift, but it can be really helpful to get some clarity around those and make sure that all of the partners are on the same page early on. So, some of the reasons that this is important is to, clarify expected and desired outcomes, make sure that the program is responsive to state, agency, program, and community priorities, determining program structure, identifying communities, populations, and stakeholders to engage, establishing effective processes for selecting the right TA provider, evaluating program successes and opportunities for refinement, and also considering the appropriate level of flexibility and adaptability within the provision of TA. The third step is determining the program structure. So we have a section where we sort of lay out some different types or kind of different models of technical assistance provision. So technical assistance that really focuses on capacity building, maybe one, it may be workshops bringing together a number of different partners, or helping with some early pieces of bringing together a project. Application assistance is another really popular type of technical assistance that SGC has done quite a bit. And so that is really focused just on the application level. And then implementation TA, which can be both helping a community to implement a grant, or it may be implementation of a policy. The next section focuses on thinking about whether or not you would prefer to provide technical assistance through, in-house or through a third party. There are a number of different considerations to think about that are highlighted in that section in making that decision. We also have a section here around an outreach and engagement strategy, which is really important to think about early on in the process, as well as metrics and evaluation plan, and program sustainability, meaning how to ensure that the actual capacity building or technical assistance work that you're doing has long-term benefits in the community and isn't just, sort of a one-time, one-off engagement in a community. The next section is on sort of the nuts and bolts of contracting. So we cover some key considerations, including, who you might want to be a part of your project management team, some information around contracts versus grants, thinking about whether or not you would prefer to set your technical assistance up as a grant program or through a contract. As well as thinking about the desired expertise and experience of your technical assistance providers. We also highlight a number of different procurement methods. This includes kind of all of the different contracting methods that are available to us at the state level. We also include some, high-level information on contracting recommendations, competitive bidding guidance, and contract language guidance. The state contracting manual is really kind of your reference document for a lot of this information, but this section is really meant to be able to help program staff or those of us who aren't as steeped in the contracting world to better understand how to utilize the state contracting manual and what kinds of key pieces of information you may need to know. Project management, this goes over clarifying roles and points of contact, setting in place clear communications processes, engaging potential TA recipients, and then really thinking about how to operationalize this flexibility and responsiveness piece that we talked about in the core principles. We also have a section on evaluation, which starts with talking about why evaluation is important. And this is something that is often very easy to leave towards the end of any kind of engagement that we have, but the more that you can think about it early on and upfront, the more effective it can be in helping you to course correct in the middle of a technical assistance contract. And also just to ensure that you have some clarity around where you are throughout the project and whether or not you're meeting your goals. The key considerations that we highlight here are setting goals, budgeting, an evaluation plan, and then stakeholder participation and engagement, and metrics and data collection. Next, we have a section on communications. Again, we start off by talking about why communications is important. And it's important to note that this section is mainly focused on communications in terms of sharing, stories and sharing successes throughout your technical assistance program. It's a little bit less focused on sort of the day-to-day communications that you may have between, a state agency and your technical assistance provider or recipients. So here we talk about communications planning. We touch a little bit on audience, accessibility, including language accessibility, ADA compliance, and also reading level, making sure that the information that you're providing is clear and easy for a broad audience to understand. Storytelling and some best practices around spreading the word and sort of working with partners to help get out specific messages quickly. And then we have our appendices, which I already talked about a little bit, but as I mentioned before, the tribal technical assistance guidance will be posted in July, and we will be opening that up for tribal comment and including that section in the final technical assistance guidelines. So for public comment, we have public comment open until Monday, July 20th. You can submit your comments to our email address at ta@sgc.ca.gov. And as I mentioned before, we will be presenting the final document to the Strategic Growth Council on August 26th. And we will also be revisiting this document. So certainly if, for whatever reason you aren't able to get public comment in time, we still think it would be really helpful to have your feedback because we will certainly be continuing to update this document. with that, I think we can open it up for questions. I've seen a couple of notes come through here.
Yeah, I'm happy to read them for you, Ina.
Thank you. Actually, that would be great, Sarah.
So the first question we have is the intention of the guidelines to provide TA specifically in applying for state funding. This seems to be a reoccurring part of the narrative. Does it also address the TA state agencies provide either by state staff or a contractor once entities are funded and implementing work plans?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I may have addressed it later on, but it's true. I think our experience at the Strategic Growth Council has focused quite a bit on technical assistance related to grant funding opportunities. But this document absolutely can be useful in thinking about implementation of either grant project, funded projects, or also specific policies. So I think they're definitely, I think that a lot of this information should hopefully hold for those kinds of things. But as folks are reading through, if you do see any opportunities to highlight information that would be more helpful for policy implementation or project implementation, I think that those would be really helpful things to hear feedback on. Our work group did include folks from a number of different agencies as well who had some experience with that, but again, would really appreciate any feedback.
Another question that I answered in the chat was if the slides can be emailed. We're gonna post them to our website along with the recording, and that will take us a few days. And then I will email out the participant list once those are posted. Do we have a list of TA providers or consultants who can help to create a program?
That's a great question. That is not a part of the TA guidelines. I think, I maybe should have talked a little bit more about the contracting pieces that we do have in there. One is an interagency agreement, which can be done, with another state agency. But we also provide a lot of information around putting together a request for proposals and bringing on a consultant. So we do have some information about some best practices that you may want to think about in putting together that request for proposals, but we didn't include a list of consultants, just since I think that would probably get pretty unwieldy, knowing that there are a lot of consultants around the state that are available for technical assistance. And we were hoping to keep this document as sort of open to all kinds of different sectors as possible. Which is why we tried to bring on a number of different agencies into our working group. So we don't have a list in the document.
That seems to be, those are the only questions. Oh, just kidding. Another one came in. So we just heard that the public comment period was live 2 days ago through the CNR listserv. Oops, sorry, unfortunately, that only gives us 2 weeks to put comments together before the July 20th deadline, which may be tough and rather short turnaround of time for a lot of us for the smaller organizations that we work with. Sorry, it's frozen. Is it possible to submit comments after the deadline?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think ideally it would really be great if it's possible to get it in by the deadline. Unfortunately, we're also on a pretty tight deadline to be able to get the document up, before our council meeting. But that being said, if you aren't able to meet the deadline, please do still send any comments that you may have, because we can do our best to try to incorporate things, if we do have the time. And if not, as I said, we are going to be continually responding to comments. So or sort of updating the document, integrating different comments. And also I think there'll be opportunities to add new case studies as new projects come online, or for us to be thinking about, new guidance that we may be able to include.
So let's see. Natalie shared the link that SGC, we have a LinkedIn group for folks who are interested in technical assistance opportunities with SGC and also other state agencies. We do post those opportunities there. So if you want to join, please do, and I will accept your request to join this afternoon. And then another question we have here is, as a potential TA provider, I could help with a number of the TA you specified, but I'm not an expert in all of them. Are you pushing for only one TA contract per potential proposal, applicating entity, or several? I'm not 100% clear on this question. I think it's asking, what is our approach to contracting with TA providers in the TA guidelines? Please make a comment in the chat if I misinterpreted that question.
I think folks may also be able to unmute themselves. So
oh yeah, you
if
can.
the person who asked that question wants to just add a little bit more context, that would be great.
Hi, I'm Steve Mack. I'm the one who asked the question. As a consultant, I can provide technical assistance, but I can't provide technical assistance in all of the areas that you're specifying. So my clients are the people who will be applying for an SGC grant. If you are saying that the people applying for an SGC grant should hire one and only one consultant who can do all of these things, I think they're going to be hard put to find someone who can do all of those things, because we consultants have specialties. And you want the best consultant that's most appropriate for what you as a person writing a grant proposal needs.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. That makes sense. So this document is really meant to support state agencies in developing technical assistance programs. The audience, or the principal audience, is state agencies. So we aren't necessarily starting a technical assistance program through this document. We do certainly have some requests for proposals that go out continually for specifically helping with technical assistance for some of our grant programs. And if you are interested in that, we do have this LinkedIn group, and we can always send out some materials around that. And we might be able to have another conversation offline as well, Stephen, to talk about, anything that if you might be interested in being a technical assistance provider, sort of what the process would be on that piece. Did we have any other questions in our list?
One question that came through the chat. Ina, can you talk a little bit how if we're gonna share the comments after the July 20th deadline, or if we plan on sharing them publicly? And if we do share comments we receive, will they be anonymous?
Yes, that's a great question. We actually are planning to connect internally to have a conversation about that soon. If anyone has strong feelings about that one way or another, that would be helpful to know. I think originally when we had thought about doing a public comment period, it was mainly to get feedback on the document and incorporate those comments But if there is a desire to share those comments out, I think that is something that we could consider doing. And if anonymity is an issue, we could also certainly keep them anonymous. Since this isn't connected to funding in any way, it's really an opportunity to be able to provide some feedback on a guidance document, or essentially a manual that's being created that helps state agencies better understand how to meet the needs of communities across the state. And I think technical assistance providers' feedback is also really helpful, because we want to be able to give guidance that also makes sure that TA providers can be as effective as possible in their work. But I think so. We will certainly be reading through all of the comments and incorporating things into the document, and I'll have to get back to you on the plan for sharing those out. If anyone does have strong feelings about that, or any feelings at all, please feel free to include those with your comments as well.
I'm not seeing any more questions come through the chat, but if anyone has any more questions or just thoughts, or want to share a bit about TA, your experience with TA, feel free to unmute yourself.
Hey everybody, this is Kiran Kumar, also on the Community Assistance for Climate Equity team. I just wanted to go back to the question or point Stephen had brought up, and I just wanted to offer some additional clarification that despite these being called guidelines, they are unlike other program guidelines that folks have seen come out of SGC. The kind of the follow-up of this document will not be a funding program, but instead, as Ina had made clear, that the audience for this document is really other state agencies to help craft their own provision of technical assistance, recognizing that SGC has about 5 years of formal experience developing TA programs, funding consultants, as well as community organizations within those communities to provide TA. We felt that it was important to kind of put to paper what some of those effective practices are, so that we can begin discussions with other agencies on what really effective TA can look like. And so I just don't want folks thinking that this manual is in any way prescriptive or intended to exclude potential TA providers. Really, it is the starting point for an agency to develop their program, from which point they can then decide the approach that they want to take with selecting either consultants or the model of TA that they want to implement.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Kieran. Yeah, and one other thing to note that I may not have mentioned up front is that these aren't, requirements for technical assistance. This is really just meant to be sort of a value add, adding some guidance and resources to state agencies who are looking to do technical assistance. And we do hope that it can be useful also for other organizations that may be doing technical assistance. For technical assistance providers, or also for foundations or others that may be funding technical assistance. So, hopefully it will be interesting to a number of different audiences. But yes, that's absolutely correct, Karen, that, yeah, it could be misleading, the fact that it's called guidelines, but it's more meant to be almost like a manual.
Ina, I have a question. This is Sarah on team. So for just thinking about the comment about some smaller organizations that might not have time to review the full document, what are some sections of the guidelines that maybe, if they did have some time, we would really like extra eyes on?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, I certainly would love to have feedback on the core principles of this work, if you feel that there's anything missing from that document. I think it kind of depends on, you know, what kind of organization you are. I think the project management piece, it could also be helpful if there are folks who have either received TA or have provided TA that think that there could be some additional guidance there that we might add. That would be helpful. I think also the evaluation section, it would be great to have some feedback. I think it's a little bit hard to say which sections in particular, because I do think that there'll be, you know, it will kind of depend on the expertise of, you know, whoever is providing comments, but I think that those would be really helpful. We also have a section around public engagement that, you know, would also be great to get some feedback on if anyone has suggestions. And another thing to clarify too is that this document is really not meant to be comprehensive and covering every one of the sections in a lot of detail, but really is meant to be kind of an overview of how a sort of state agency program staff member might be able to think about all of the different considerations to take into account when doing technical assistance. So, you know, if you take a look at the evaluation section, likely it will not feel you know, incredibly in depth in the same way that a manual that was just focused on evaluation might. But if there are some sort of key elements that feel like they could be added in, you know, this would be a great opportunity to provide us with that kind of information. And I think for, you know, community partners and TA providers, this could be a great opportunity to be able to provide some feedback to state agencies around how to do our technical assistance better. And so, you know, would really welcome any, you know, feedback also from experience that folks have had. If there are some pieces that they think are really important that they don't see included in the guidelines.
Awesome. Thanks for that response, Ina.
That was a great question. Thanks, Sarah. Are there any other comments or questions?
Hi, this is Steve again. I'll raise one more.
Okay.
One of the things that I do is evaluation. Are you talking about evaluation of the guidelines, evaluation of a provider of technical assistance, or what goes into technical assistance for evaluation of a program? Three different kinds of evaluation. What kind of feedback are you looking for?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for this document, the evaluation section is really focused on evaluation of the technical assistance itself. And so same for, you know, the communication section, and most of the document is really focused very much on giving state agency staff some guidance around how to implement a technical assistance program. And so the evaluation, while there are some pieces that may be relevant also to, you know, evaluation of a grant program, what's really written in the evaluation section of this document is focused on evaluation of technical assistance and capacity building work. But thank you for that question. That's great. We can just hang out here until, you know, in case any other questions come up. So
I'm happy to hang out as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So much for
Thanks so
joining.
much.
Yeah, if people are starting to hop off, it seems.
Okay. Okay. Well, maybe we'll give it another couple minutes and then wrap it up. Thanks so much for joining.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone.